We need God's wisdom to see through the fog, and we need it every day. We all just need to be sober about our own need for wisdom, even though the hevel of life makes wisdom elusive. And this was a reality for the most famous, at the time, the most powerful person on earth. And he had ginormous gifts of wisdom, but he still ended up making dramatically wrong choices that hurt him considerably. Let's talk about him. This is King Solomon. Some of you may know some Bible history, some of you don't, that's okay. He was the son of King David, okay? David was like the first good king in the history of Israel. And Solomon is inheriting a lot of great stuff. So let's go there. Let's go to the night. He is a young man, and he's now the new king, okay? And his dad has done so much right. His dad's kind of like this public hero, but really his dad positioned him well. Now a lot of the battles are already done. He's sitting on mountains of money, a plan to build a temple for the living God. You know, he's gonna build his own palace. He's got peace surrounding him. And he still says, as a young man, God appears to him. And this is a big deal. God doesn't just appear to people most of the time. God appears to him. He says, hey, Solomon, I'll give you whatever you want. That sounds like a pretty good deal, right? And Solomon wisely says, well, what I want to ask for then is wisdom so that I can rule your people well. And God's like, you hit the jackpot, man. That was the right answer. Now I'm not only going to give you wisdom, I'm going to give you all kinds of other stuff besides. Riches and peace and power. So here's Solomon. He's flooded with wisdom. He's got everything he could ever need. He's by every estimation, he is a complete success. Listen to the way 1 Kings 4:29 says it. God gave Solomon very great wisdom and understanding, and knowledge as vast as the sands of the seashore. In fact, his wisdom exceeded that of all the wise men of the East and the wise men of Egypt. Skipping down to verse 34, and the kings from every nation sent their ambassadors to listen to the wisdom of Solomon. Man, people are sending delegates to see, hey, Solomon, we got to hear what you're saying, man. We got to understand. All we're hearing is how amazingly wise you are. We need to know it for ourselves. Even people like the Queen of Sheba. This is a gal, she comes, she visits, she brings her entire entourage, and she's so captivated by the wisdom of God through Solomon that she says, your God has done this. Your God has given you all this wisdom and given you this kingdom. He's given it to you for the sake of your people so that you can show them justice. So here's a woman, she's not even a God follower. She's not even a part of the nation of God's people, and yet she's coming in and she's like, God did this, man. This is God right here. This is huge that the other nations are now recognizing, man, your God is legit. Your God, man, he does stuff. This is blowing our minds. So now he's got peace on all sides. He's leading the most powerful nation on earth at the time. 1 Kings 10:23. So King Solomon became greater than all the kings of the earth in riches, in wisdom. All the earth was seeking the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Now, we need to pause it because I need you to understand just how significant this is. Years ago, 500 years ago, there was a lone man, Abraham. All he had was a wife. He didn't have any kids. And God makes him this outrageous promise. He says, Abraham, even though you're old, I'm going to do this redonkulous miracle. I'm going to bring nations from you. I'm going to bring kings from you. I'm going to make that people a sign to the rest of the nations of the wisdom of God. Now, time has gone by. They went through a season of being slaves. And then God was faithful to lead them out of slavery. They came into their own land. They didn't know how they were ever going to take that land, but they did. And now they're set up. Now they've got peace on all sides. Now they're so rich that they're building temples and palaces. And all of the promises made to Abraham have come true. Like now, Solomon's feeling this. He's looking back. He's like, wow, that promise that was made to Abraham, like I'm the living embodiment of that promise coming to pass. Everything God said has happened. And I'm wondering if he didn't feel a little bit of the weight of that. Solomon, man, wow, you have a whole lot. And you have a whole lot to lose if you do this wrong, man. Make sure you get this right. Well, unfortunately, he doesn't get it right. Even though he does wisdom for so long, he then turns away his heart from the Lord and begins to do non-wisdom. Let's read about the fall, Solomon's fall together. 1 Kings 11, we'll start in verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Uh-oh. That key word many there, that's not good. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married a woman from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Guys, that is 1,000 women. Bro, you can't be man enough for that. I'm just saying. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord, his God, as his father, David, had been. Let's pause there. Guys, this is a big deal. It's not just that God was gonna be jealous if his people served other gods, okay? God knows, God believes there are no other gods. I'm the only God. But when you worship these other gods that these foreign women are bringing in from their lands, they've got all these gods that are not like probably a God that you would think of. We live in a very pluralistic age where even if you're wanting to say, oh, there's these other spirits and other gods, mostly what people are usually talking about is some kind of God that's a lot like the real God. He's benevolent. He's really forgiving. Often they've kind of made him in their own image. He would do whatever I would do, okay? But it tends to be tame and gentle. These gods are not that way. These gods demand things like child sacrifice and for you to be extremely manipulative and evil. And so it's not just that God is jealous because you're worshiping something that isn't even a God at all, but it's changing who these people are. We become what we worship. And so they're becoming a very different kind of people. And God's mad about it. Kind of the same way, let's just pretend for a second that I'm married. I've been married almost 20 years, but let's just pretend that my wife wanted to also be married to her imaginary friend. Yeah. Well, how many know that'd get weird, right? I'm like, Kenzie, I'm the guy. What are you talking? You're talking to some dude that doesn't even exist. Well, God is a little bit like that. Like, what do you mean you're worshiping these imaginary things? I'm the guy. What are you talking about? And so obviously it hurts God's heart, but it also changes his people. And so God's very angry with Solomon. Verse 9, we're gonna skip down there. You can read about all the idolatry later if you want to, but verse 9, the Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. And when he says twice, he's saying, twice, dude. Like I appear to most people, not at all. I appeared to you twice. It was a big deal, Solomon, that you're going down this path. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, since you've not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. Solomon's lack of wisdom is going to cause severe damage, not only to his own life, but for generations to come. See, even though this is the apex, this seems to be in a way a type of fulfillment of a lot of promises. After this, it's all gonna fall apart. After this, the kingdom is gonna be torn in two and people are gonna go from bad to worse. And ultimately, God's gonna get so sick of them because they're mimicking the ways of these false gods, he's gonna kick them out of their own land. And it's gonna take a lot later on for them to ever come back. And they will because God's merciful. But even so, there's generation after generation of disaster because of what Solomon is choosing now. And it's not just the lust, and it's crazy lust that he's dealing with, but it's also the worship of idols. It's not mentioned in this particular text, but another thing that Solomon did was he demanded slaves to build the very temple of God. He used his own people to be slaves to build the temple of God. Now that's all kinds of whack when you think about their story. God's gotta be looking at this and be like, I brought y'all out of slavery. Like that was a big deal. And now you get all these promises, and instead of being thankful, you do the very evil that was perpetrated on you? What are you doing? But Solomon, I don't know, maybe he was just used to people thinking he was all that. Maybe he was used to being very prominent. Maybe he was so trusting in his own wisdom that he took a look at God's wisdom and said, man, I'm already wise in myself. I don't need any more wisdom from God. I'm just gonna go my own way. As great as a leader as he may have been at one time, Solomon failed to lead himself to the source of wisdom, which was God himself. And so let's turn it on us now. Because you might lead stuff, you might be in charge of stuff, you might have made 1,000 right decisions. But are you still looking to the source? Can you lead yourself today, not yesterday, today, to the source?